At 37 years old, Rocco earned $92,000 a year as a senior operations engineer for the Texas Department of Transportation. He was a good man, a steady man, a man who understood that the integrity of a bridge depended on foundations no one ever saw. On Sunday, October 12th, at 8:14 p.m., in their rented Montrose apartment that cost $3,500 a month, his wife, Aveline, destroyed the foundation of his world with a single, casually delivered sentence. She was wearing a cream-colored silk lounge set, a $200 item from a boutique he couldn't remember the name of. Her elegant frame curled into the corner of their $9,000 leather sofa. The light from a ridiculously expensive $500 floor lamp cast a halo around her carefully arranged coils of hair. Rocco was on the other side of the room, near the kitchen, wiping down the granite countertop. He was wearing a faded 20-year-old University of Texas engineering t-shirt he'd owned since he was a student, its cotton softened by 1,000 wash cycles. "Rocco, honey," she began, her voice the same smooth, pleasant tone she used to order a $400 tasting menu at Uchi. "I think we should get a divorce." Rocco's hand stopped moving. The scent of the lemon-scented cleaner suddenly seemed sharp, invasive. He turned slowly, his heart a cold, heavy thing in his chest. He looked at her, truly looked at her. Her expression was placid, almost serene. There were no tears, no signs of distress. This was not a confession, it was an announcement. He had no idea how wrong he was about what was coming next. He thought this was the devastating part. "But," she continued, holding up a manicured hand as if to forestall an outburst he had no intention of making, "I want it to be amicable. No drama. We're adults. We can just end the marriage part and stay friends. We'll figure out the stuff later. No need for lawyers and all that ugliness." And there it was, the true devastation. It wasn't the divorce. He had felt the ground shifting beneath his feet for years, the slow, tectonic drift of two people moving in opposite directions. The devastation was her assumption. Her belief that he would simply acquiesce, that he would play along with her narrative of a sophisticated, modern uncoupling. She wanted to keep him as a friend, a comfortable piece of her past, a testament to her own maturity. She wasn't ending a marriage, she was rebranding it. She was soft-launching their separation, and she expected him to be grateful for the gentle handling. A long, quiet moment stretched between them, thick with the hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of Houston traffic. He saw his entire life with her in that moment, a highlight reel of small humiliations and quiet dismissals. He saw her laughing with her friends, her hand covering her mouth as she glanced at his $89 Timex watch. He saw her wrinkling her nose at the pictures of his family's modest home in a less fashionable part of the city. He saw a dozen moments where his solid, dependable world was treated as a quaint, slightly embarrassing backdrop to her vibrant art gallery life. He felt the years of it all coalesce into a single point of absolute clarity. It was a feeling he recognized from his work. It was the moment you run the final stress analysis, and the numbers don't lie. The structure is compromised. There is no patching it. The only responsible thing to do is to plan for a controlled demolition. Rocco took a slow breath. He walked over to the sink, rinsed the sponge, and placed it neatly in its caddy. He turned back to her, his face a calm, unreadable mask. "Okay, Aveline," he said, his voice even and low. "Friends, no drama." Aveline beamed, a brilliant, relieved smile that did not reach her eyes. "Oh, Rocco, I knew you'd understand. You're such a good man." He had no idea what was coming. But for the first time, she had no idea what was coming either. Have you ever been in a situation where someone completely underestimated you? The story of Rocco is a masterclass in what happens when they do. Keep watching to see how a man they called simple and boring executed a plan so precise it was a work of art. The facade of their life was constructed from Aveline's desires, and Rocco had paid for most of it. The $3,500 a month apartment in Montrose was her choice, a sterile glass box overlooking a street lined with overpriced brunch spots. "It's about the address, Rocco," she'd explained, as if he were a child. "It signals success." To him, it signaled a life lived for the observation of others. He missed the creak of wooden floors and the shade of a real oak tree. He missed his bungalow. It was a small two-bedroom house in the Heights he'd bought for $150,000 long before he met Aveline, back when the neighborhood was still a mix of working families and artists. It was his, free and clear, a premarital asset. She refused to live there. "It's so small," she'd said, touring it once with a look of profound disappointment. "And the kitchen is ancient." She never seemed to grasp that he had renovated that kitchen himself, board by board, tile by tile. He had loved the work. He had loved the dust. Instead, they lived in her world. Her car was a $70,000 Audi Q5 financed over 72 months, the $950 monthly payment a constant, low-grade hum of anxiety in Rocco's budget. His car was a 2012 Toyota Camry with 187,000 miles on it, a car he maintained himself, a car that never failed him. Aveline refused to be seen in it. "Can we take the Audi?" was the constant refrain, even if they were just going to the grocery store. Their weekends were a performance. Friday nights were gallery openings, where Aveline would glide through the crowds, a glass of $12 Chardonnay in her hand, talking about abstracts and installations. Rocco would stand near the wall, feeling large and out of place in his one decent sports coat, a $400 piece he'd bought for her best friend's wedding. He'd listen to her friends, men in $2,000 suits and women draped in brand names, talk about their trips to Bali and their stock portfolios. They were architects, lawyers, and creative consultants. When they asked Rocco what he did and he said, "I'm an engineer for TxDOT," their eyes would glaze over. It was at one of these events, a stuffy benefit at a downtown hotel, that Aveline had delivered one of the deepest cuts. She was talking to a man named Julian, who owned 3 art galleries and wore shoes that cost more than Rocco's monthly car payment. Julian had asked Aveline what her husband did. "Oh, Rocco," she'd said, a light tinkling laugh in her voice. "He builds bridges. It's adorable, really. He makes sure the roads don't fall down." She turned to Rocco and patted his arm, a gesture that was both possessive and dismissive. "Isn't that right, honey?" The word adorable had hung in the air between them. It was a word you used for a puppy or a child's drawing. It was not a word you used for a man who managed multi-million-dollar infrastructure projects, a man who held the safety of thousands of commuters in his hands every single day. Julian had given a thin, condescending smile and turned away, the conversation over. Rocco had just stood there, the heat rising in his cheeks, feeling like a prop in the play of her life. The cruelty wasn't always so public. It was in the small, private moments. It was the way she'd accidentally thrown out the worn leather wallet his late father had given him, replacing it with a sleek, $500 Mont Blanc version. The old one was falling apart, honey. It was embarrassing. It was the way she talked about his family after their one and only visit to his parents' home. His parents were good people. His father was a retired mechanic, his mother, a church secretary. They lived in the same small, neat house for 40 years. Their furniture was old but cared for. Their love was quiet, but immense. When Rocco brought Aveline to meet them, she had been gracious on the surface, but her discomfort was a palpable thing. She barely touched his mother's famous pecan pie and flinched when his father, his hands still bearing the faint grease stains of a lifetime of honest work, had clapped him on the back. On the drive back to Houston, she had been silent for a long time. Then she'd sighed. "Well, They're very sweet. The pause before the sweet was filled with 1,000 unspoken judgments. That whole neighborhood, though, it's just so gray, so depressing. I'm glad you got out. She didn't understand that he hadn't got out. He had built on the foundation they gave him. The work ethic, the sense of duty, the belief that a man's worth was measured by the reliability of his work, not the label on his suit. She saw their life as something to escape. He saw it as something to honor. He never took her back to visit them again. It was easier than seeing the judgment in her eyes. Money was a constant source of friction, not the lack of it, but the allocation of it. His $92,000 salary was a solid, middle-class income, but in Aveline's world, it was barely enough to keep up appearances. She had a part-time job as an assistant at a small gallery in Montrose, earning maybe $45,000 a year, but most of her income went to her wardrobe. The big expenses, the rent, the Audi, the $600 a week grocery bills filled with organic produce and imported cheeses, fell to him. One evening, she'd come home flushed with excitement, holding a brochure for a resort in Tuscany. "Look, my friend Veronica is going with her husband. It's only $15,000 for 10 days. We should go." Rocco had been sitting at the small desk in their second bedroom, which served as his home office, paying their bills online. He looked at the numbers on the screen: the $950 car payment, the $3,500 rent, the $2,000 credit card bill from a month of her dinners out with friends. "Aveline," he'd said gently, "we can't afford a $15,000 vacation." Her face had hardened. "Veronica's husband makes it work. He's in finance." "I'm not Veronica's husband," Rocco had said, a rare edge in his voice. "I'm an engineer." "I'm aware," she'd snapped. She'd looked down at his wrist, at the simple Timex watch he wore every day. It was functional, waterproof, and kept perfect time. "God, Rocco. Sometimes I look at you, with your cheap watch and your sensible shoes, and I wonder what you even want out of life." "This watch was a gift from my dad," he'd said quietly. "It works just fine." "That's the problem," she'd shot back, her voice dripping with contempt. "Everything about you works just fine. Don't you ever want something more, something beautiful, something that isn't just functional?" He looked at her then, standing in the doorway in a $2,400 Burberry dress she'd bought for a party they never ended up attending. And he realized they were speaking different languages. He found beauty in a well-designed schematic, in the elegant curve of a freeway overpass, in the simple, perfect function of a machine. She found beauty in price tags and brand names. They were living in the same apartment, but they were inhabiting different universes. He had no idea how to bridge the gap. He just kept working, kept paying the bills, kept believing that his steadiness, his reliability, his love would eventually be enough. On that Sunday night, as she smiled her serene, relieved smile, he finally understood. It was never going to be enough. For her, he was just another thing that worked just fine, and she had finally decided to upgrade. After Aveline said her piece, she stood up, stretched like a cat, and drifted toward their bedroom. "I'm tired, honey. Let's not talk about it anymore tonight. We have all the time in the world to sort it out." She paused at the doorway. "You don't mind sleeping on the couch for a bit, do you? Just to, start the transition." Rocco watched her disappear into the bedroom. He heard the soft click of the door. He was alone in the vast white living room. The $9,000 sofa suddenly looked like a lifeboat. "Okay, Aveline," he whispered to the empty room. "I'll sleep on the couch." This was the first lie. He had no intention of sleeping. His mind, which was so good at seeing stress points and calculating load capacities, was now running 1,000 scenarios a second. Every casual cruelty, every dismissive comment, every expensive purchase she'd ever made flashed through his memory, not as a hurt, but as a data point. He was no longer a husband processing a heartbreak. He was an engineer assessing a catastrophic structural failure, and he knew with chilling certainty what he had to do. He walked over to the sofa but didn't sit. He stood there for a long time, listening to the silence from the bedroom. He was playing dumb, letting her believe he was processing, grieving, accepting her terms. Inside, a quiet, cold fury was crystallizing into a plan he hadn't known he had until this very moment, but one that felt like it had been waiting for him, fully formed, for years. The first step was survival. He knew he couldn't stay there. Her desire to stay friends was a trap. It was a way for her to manage the narrative, to control the emotional fallout, to keep him in her orbit as a non-threatening, compliant fixture. He would be the good ex-husband, the one she could point to as proof of her own magnanimity. He would be a supporting character in the story of her graceful new life. He refused the role. He walked quietly into the second bedroom, his makeshift office. He closed the door without making a sound. The room was cramped, filled with his books on structural engineering and urban planning. It was the one room in the apartment that felt like his. He sat down at his desk, the chair creaking softly, and opened his personal laptop, not the shared family iMac in the living room. The time on the screen read 1:17 a.m. Monday morning. This was his discovery scene, but he wasn't discovering a betrayal. He was discovering his freedom. He navigated to a folder on his desktop labeled Projects. Inside another folder, Contingency. He clicked it open. There were 3 files. The first was a PDF. It was a job offer from the Tennessee Department of Transportation, dated 6 weeks prior. Senior Project Manager, Nashville Division. The salary was $105,000, a $13,000 raise. He had seen the posting online months ago during a late night of feeling particularly adrift. On a whim, he had applied. He had done the video interviews during his lunch breaks, sitting in his Camry in the TX parking lot. When the offer came, he had saved it, telling himself it was just a confidence booster, an escape fantasy. He never thought he would actually use it. Now it looked like a lifeline. The second file was a link to a Zillow page. It was for his bungalow in the Heights. He had kept it, renting it out to a nice young couple for years. He'd used the rental income to pay the property taxes and insurance, banking the rest. The Zillow estimate, the Zestimate, glowed on the screen. $750,000. The small house she had scorned was now a significant financial asset. His asset. The third file was a scanned document, his most recent pension statement. He had been contributing to it for 15 years. The vested amount was $212,450. A solid, unglamorous number built from years of solid, unglamorous work. He knew from a quiet inquiry with HR that his pension was portable to other state transportation departments. It was his. He stared at the 3 files. 3 pillars of a life he could build without her: a better job, a valuable property, a secure retirement. She had no idea any of it existed. In her world, he was just Rocco, the boring engineer with the cheap watch. She had never bothered to look at the blueprints of his life. She had only ever criticized the facade. He made a decision. He wasn't just going to leave the apartment. He was going to leave the state. He was going to execute a move so clean, so decisive, that there would be no room for her to spin it, no opportunity for her to turn it into her story. It would be his. He took a deep breath and began to type. First, an email to the HR contact at TDOT. Subject, re-job offer, Senior Project Manager. Dear Ms. Albright, please accept this email as my formal acceptance of the Senior Project Manager position. As we discussed, I can be available to start this Wednesday, October 15th. I look forward to joining the team in Nashville. Sincerely, Rocco Vargas. He hit send before he could second-guess himself. The sound of the click was deafening in the quiet room. Next, he drafted an email to his boss at TXDOT, a man named Bill who had been his mentor for a decade. Subject: Resignation Bill. Please accept this as my resignation effective immediately. I have accepted a position in another state. I will call you in the morning to discuss the transition of my projects. Thank you for everything. Rocco. He would call Bill from the road. Bill would understand. Finally, he opened a new browser tab and searched for Divorce Lawyer Nashville. He found a firm with good reviews, one that specialized in interstate residency issues. He filled out their online contact form, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Name: Rocco Vargas. Spouse's name: Aveline Vargas. Brief description of situation: seeking to file for divorce in Tennessee. I am relocating to Nashville permanently on Monday, October 13th. My spouse resides in Houston, Texas. We have no children. Primary assets are premarital. I require a clean, fast, and professional separation. My spouse is under the impression we are pursuing an amicable, non-legal dissolution. This is not the case. He submitted the form. It was done. All of it. In the span of 20 minutes, he had quit his job, accepted a new one, and initiated the end of his marriage from a jurisdiction 800 miles away. He closed the laptop and sat back, the adrenaline coursing through him. He felt a strange, thrilling calm. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't thrown a single thing. He had simply agreed to her terms. Friends, no drama. Then he had quietly, methodically, and completely dismantled the life she thought she was in control of. He looked at the couch, then back at the closed bedroom door. He thought about her, sleeping peacefully, dreaming of her sophisticated, drama-free divorce. She had made a critical mistake. She had assumed that because he was quiet, he was weak. She had mistaken his patience for passivity. An engineer knows that the most powerful forces are often the silent ones: tension, compression, gravity, and the quiet, steady pressure of a man who has finally had enough. He wasn't going to sleep on the couch. He was going to wait for the sun to come up, and then he was going to start driving. The strategic planning hadn't started that Sunday night. It had been a slow, subconscious process, like minerals forming under pressure. The job application to TDOT had been an act of quiet rebellion, a what-if scenario he entertained on lonely nights. The call with the Nashville attorney, Mark Jeffries, a month ago had been the first concrete step. He'd found Mark's name on a forum for engineers relocating for work. The call had been discreet, a 30-minute video conference from his car in the TXDOT parking garage, the engine off, the air thick with the Houston humidity. Mark was a sharp, no-nonsense man in his 50s, with a reassuringly calm demeanor. "So let me get this straight, Mr. Vargas," Mark had said, looking at him through the screen. "You're not sure if you're going to leave your wife, but if you do, you want to know your options regarding a move to Tennessee." "That's right," Rocco had said. "It's a contingency plan. I hope I don't have to use it." "Hope is not a legal strategy," Mark had replied, not unkindly. "Let's talk facts. The house in the Heights is premarital. You bought it before the wedding, correct? Title is only in your name? Correct. Good, that's clean. Your pension? You started at TXDOT before you were married? Yes, 5 years before. Excellent. The portion accrued before the marriage is yours, full stop. The portion accrued during the marriage is technically community property in Texas, but if you establish residency in Tennessee and file here, the laws are different. It's an equitable distribution state, not a community property state. It gives us more flexibility, especially if the separation is, let's say, one-sided. The words hung in the air. One-sided. Mark had seen this movie before. "What do I need to do to establish residency?" Rocco had asked. "Get a job here. Get a lease here. Get a Tennessee driver's license. Register your car here. The moment you do those things, you are a resident of the state of Tennessee." From that moment, the clock starts. The sooner you file after establishing residency, the clearer the jurisdiction is. It makes it very difficult and very expensive for a spouse in another state to fight it. The retainer was $5,000. Rocco had paid it from his personal savings account, the one he'd opened with the rental income from the bungalow, an account Aveline knew nothing about. It was his fix-the-roof fund. He was just fixing a different kind of roof. "Call me when you're ready to pull the trigger," Mark had said at the end of the call. "And, Mr. Vargas, don't tell her you're coming. The whole strategy relies on a clean break and undeniable residency. You leave on a Monday, you're a Tennessean by Wednesday, we file by Friday. It's a shock and awe tactic, legally speaking. It prevents her from filing first in Texas and trapping you in their community property system." At the time, it had all felt like a drastic, paranoid fantasy. He had saved Mark's number and the notes from their call, hoping he would never need them. But as he sat in his office in the dead of night, Aveline's words echoing in his ears, he realized Mark Jeffries hadn't been paranoid. He had been prescient. He had all the evidence he needed, not for a courtroom, but for his own conscience. The evidence was in the memories he had been replaying for years. The memory of her calling his life's work adorable. The memory of her disdain for his family. The memory of her looking at his $89 watch with contempt. He had compiled this evidence in the quiet ledger of his heart, and the balance was overwhelmingly clear. The debt could never be repaid. The only option was to close the account. His actions that night were not born of sudden anger. They were the logical conclusion of a long and painful equation. He was an engineer, after all. He believed in data, and the data was irrefutable. The structure was failing, and a controlled demolition was the only way to prevent a catastrophic collapse that would take everyone down with it. He thought about the phrase, "stay friends." It was the most insidious part of her proposal. It was a demand for his emotional labor even after she had discarded him as a husband. She wanted his validation. She wanted his forgiveness on her own terms, without ever having to apologize. She wanted to avoid the social stigma of a messy divorce by forcing him into the role of the gracious, understanding ex. He would not play the part. True friendship was built on respect, and she had shown him none. He spent the next 2 hours not packing his things, but organizing his digital life. He downloaded files from the shared family computer. Tax records, bank statements, scans of their marriage license and his birth certificate. He created a new encrypted folder on a portable hard drive, a small $100 device from Best Buy. He methodically scrubbed his personal laptop of any shared accounts or passwords. He was separating their digital lives as cleanly as he was about to separate their physical ones. At 4:30 a.m., he was done. The apartment was still and dark. He walked to the hall closet and pulled out a single large suitcase and a file box. He didn't go into the master bedroom. He went to his side of the walk-in closet, the side filled with his functional, unfashionable clothes. He packed methodically. 3 pairs of jeans, 7 work shirts, his steel-toed work boots, his running shoes, a single suit, the $400 one. He packed his engineering manuals, heavy and solid. He packed the framed photo of his parents that usually sat on his desk. He looked around at the rows of Aveline's clothes, the designer dresses and expensive shoes, each one a ghost of a memory he was happy to leave behind. He felt nothing. He went into the bathroom and gathered his things, his toothbrush, his razor, his cheap bar of soap. He left her side of the vanity untouched, a perfect museum of 100 tiny, expensive bottles and jars. potions that promised beauty and youth, costing thousands. He took nothing that she had bought him, not the Mont Blanc wallet, not the cashmere sweater she'd given him for Christmas that he never wore, not the fancy cologne that always made him sneeze. He packed his laptop bag with the portable hard drive, his personal phone, and a charger. He put the file box by the door. Inside was everything he needed: his birth certificate, his social security card, the title to his Camry, the deed to the bungalow, his life in a single neat box. At 5:15 a.m., he stood by the front door of the apartment, suitcase in hand. He took one last look around the shadowy living room. It was a beautiful prison, and he had just found the key. He didn't feel sad. He didn't feel angry. He felt light. He opened the door, stepped out, and closed it behind him without a sound. He did not look back. The strike began at 5:30 a.m. on Monday morning. The parking garage of the Montrose apartment building was silent and cool. Rocco loaded his one suitcase and his file box into the trunk of his 2012 Toyota Camry. The car, with its 187,000 miles and its dependable four-cylinder engine, felt more like home than the apartment ever had. He got in, turned the key, and the engine hummed to life without protest. He backed out of the parking space, the spot next to Aveline's gleaming $70,000 Audi Q5, and drove out into the pre-dawn darkness of Houston. The 12-hour drive was not an escape. It was a pilgrimage. It was a deliberate, methodical act of reclaiming his own life, mile by mile. He didn't turn on the radio. He didn't want to hear love songs or angry rock anthems. He put on an audiobook he'd downloaded months ago, The Great Bridge, a history of the building of the Brooklyn Bridge. The calm, steady voice of the narrator talking about caissons and steel cables and the sheer force of human will required to span an impossible gap was the only company he needed. As the sun rose over the flat landscape of East Texas, tinting the sky in shades of orange and pink, he felt a profound sense of peace. He was a man in motion, a man with a destination. Every sign he passed, Texarkana, Little Rock, Memphis, was a milestone, a marker of the distance he was putting between his past and his future. At 9:32 a.m., his phone buzzed in the cup holder. He glanced at the screen. A text from Aveline. Aveline, 9:32 a.m. Where are you? Your side of the closet is empty. He didn't reply. He just kept driving. He imagined her waking up, stretching in their $1,000 bed, reaching for him and finding the space empty. He imagined her walking to the closet, a flicker of confusion on her face. Not anger, not yet. Just confusion. He drove on. The audiobook narrator was describing the dangers of caisson disease, the bends that afflicted the workers digging the foundations for the bridge towers deep beneath the East River. Men who went too deep, too fast, and came up broken. Rocco felt a kinship with them. He had been living under a different kind of pressure for years. This drive was his slow, careful decompression. At 11:04 a.m., the phone buzzed again. Another text. Aveline, 11:04 a.m. Rocco, this isn't funny. Call me. I went to make coffee and your ugly old coffee maker is gone. He had forgotten about that. It was a $30 Mr. Coffee machine, but it made coffee exactly how he liked it. He had packed it. The detail was so small, so petty, it was almost comical. She hadn't noticed his suitcase was gone, but she had noticed the absence of his ugly coffee maker. It told him everything he needed to know. He passed a sign for Hope, Arkansas. He smiled. The irony was not lost on him. By 1:15 p.m., he was crossing the Mississippi River into Memphis. The bridge was a magnificent feat of engineering, a web of steel and concrete spanning the wide, muddy water. He felt a professional's appreciation for it. The phone buzzed violently. It wasn't a text this time. It was a call. Her picture, a smiling selfie from a vacation in Tulum, filled the screen. He let it ring until it went to voicemail. A moment later, a text came through. Aveline, 1:16 p.m. Are you seriously doing this? After I was so nice about the divorce? This is the drama I wanted to avoid. You are being so childish. He read the text, and a dry, humorless laugh escaped his lips. The drama. She thought this was the drama. She had no idea. The real drama for her hadn't even started yet. He was being childish. No, he was finally being an adult. He was taking responsibility for his own happiness, something he had outsourced to her for far too long. He pulled off the interstate in Memphis and got gas. He bought a cup of $2 gas station coffee and a stale pastry. It tasted like freedom. As he stood by his car, stretching his legs, his phone rang again. It was Bill, his boss from TxDOT. He answered. "Rocco, what the hell is this email?" Bill's voice was gruff, but concerned. "It's what it says, Bill. I'm resigning." "Just like that? No notice? That's not like you, son." "I know. I'm sorry to leave you in a lurch. Something came up. I'm on my way to Nashville. I've taken a job with TxDOT." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Rocco could hear the hum of the office in the background. "Nashville," Bill said finally. "Is this about Aveline?" Rocco was taken aback. "What do you mean?" "Son, I've been your boss for 10 years. I've seen you at the Christmas parties. I've seen the way she looks at you when she thinks no one is watching. Like you're a piece of furniture she's tired of. We all saw it. We just didn't know if you did." The words hit Rocco with the force of a physical blow. We all saw it. The humiliation he felt in those moments wasn't just in his head. It was public. His colleagues, the men and women he respected, had seen his wife's contempt for him and had been too polite to say anything. "Yeah, Bill," Rocco said, his voice thick. "I guess you could say it's about Aveline." "All right, son," Bill said, his tone shifting from managerial to paternal. "Don't worry about the projects. I'll handle it. Your pension transfer was already in the system from when you were exploring that option a while back, so that's clean. Just drive safe. And Rocco, good for you." He hung up, his hand trembling slightly. Good for you. The validation from Bill, a man he respected more than anyone, meant more to him than any word Aveline had ever said. He got back in the car and merged onto I-40 East. The sign said Nashville, 212 miles. The home stretch. At 3:45 p.m., another text from Aveline. The tone had shifted from annoyed to frantic. "Aveline, 3:45 p.m. I called your office. They said you resigned. What is going on, Rocco? You can't just resign. We have bills. That's a $92K a year job." He read the text and focused on the number. $92,000. That's what he was to her. A salary. A source of funding for her lifestyle. Not a man. Not a husband. An income stream. The final leg of the drive was a blur of green Tennessee hills and the setting sun. He arrived in Nashville just after 6 p.m. Central Time, which was still 6 p.m. Houston time. He had booked a room at an extended stay hotel online, a modest place near the airport that cost $79 a night. It was clean, anonymous, and perfect. He parked the Camry, carried his suitcase and file box to his room, and sat down on the stiff, corporate-patterned bedspread. He had done it. He had driven 760 miles in 12 hours. He had crossed 3 state lines. He had left his old life behind in a cloud of dust on the Texas interstate. His phone buzzed one last time. It was a voicemail notification. He listened to it on speakerphone, his face impassive. It was Aveline. Her voice was no longer smooth or controlled. It was high-pitched, cracking with a mixture of rage and panic. "Rocco, I swear to God, if you don't call me back, I don't know what I'll do. This is insane. You can't just disappear. What are people going to think? What am I supposed to tell my parents, my friends? You have completely humiliated me. After everything I did for you, trying to make this easy and civilized, you pull this stunt. You are the most selfish, passive-aggressive man I have ever known. You call me right now." He listened to the message, then deleted it. He turned his phone off and placed it on the bedside table. He opened his file box, took out the folder for his new job, and began to read. He had to be ready for work on Wednesday. The drama she wanted to avoid had finally arrived. It was just hers to deal with now, not his. The consequences began to cascade for Aveline on Tuesday morning, though she didn't know the full extent of it yet. Her first move, after a night of frantic, unanswered calls, was to try and leverage Rocco's workplace against him. She showed up at the TX. Northwest Houston campus at 10 a.m., dressed in an $800 power suit, her face a mask of determined outrage. She didn't have an appointment. She walked up to the front desk and asked for Bill Henderson. Bill, forewarned by Rocco's call, met her in the lobby. He did not invite her back to the offices. "Aveline," he said, his voice polite but firm, "good to see you." "Don't you good to see me, Bill?" she snapped. "Where is he? Where is Rocco? He's acting like a child, and you need to tell him to come home and face his responsibilities." Bill crossed his arms. He was a large man, and the gesture was quietly intimidating. "Aveline, as I'm sure you're aware, Rocco resigned his position here. He is no longer an employee of the Texas Department of Transportation. His whereabouts are his own private business." "But his pension, his career, he's throwing it all away." "Actually," Bill said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice, "his pension is fully portable and has been transferred. As for his career, I believe he's starting a new position. A promotion, I hear. That's all I can tell you. This is a place of business, and Rocco's personal matters are not a topic for discussion here." He turned and walked back toward the secure doors, leaving her standing alone in the middle of the lobby. Several of Rocco's former colleagues, who had been watching from a distance, saw the exchange. They saw her face, flushed with anger and humiliation. The story was already starting to spread. The quiet, boring engineer wasn't the villain of this story. Aveline was. Defeated, she retreated to her Audi. Her next call was to their landlord. She would get Rocco's name off the lease, she thought. Stick him with a penalty. But the leasing agent's voice was maddeningly cheerful. "Oh yes, Mr. and Mrs. Vargas. Your lease isn't up for another 8 months. You're locked in at that great rate of $3,500. To break the lease, there's a penalty of 2 months' rent, plus you'd forfeit your security deposit. That would be a total of $10,500. And of course, both leaseholders would be equally responsible for that debt." Aveline hung up, a cold dread seeping into her. $10,500. She didn't have that kind of money. Her $45,000 salary barely covered her clothes and lunches. She looked at her bank account on her phone. Current balance, $1,262. The $950 Audi payment was due next week. The $3,500 rent was due in 2. She was financially ruined, and she hadn't even realized it. She tried calling his parents. Rocco's mother, a gentle church-going woman, answered the phone. Aveline, in her panic, was not diplomatic. "Your son has lost his mind," she shrieked into the phone. "He's disappeared. He quit his job." There was a long, cold silence on the other end. Then, Rocco's mother spoke, her voice devoid of its usual warmth. "Aveline," she said, "Rocco is a grown man. He called us this morning. He told us he was starting a new life. He sounded happier than I've heard him in years. I think you should respect his wishes. Please don't call this number again." The line went dead. She had been cut off. The family she had considered so gray and depressing had formed a united front around their son, and she was on the outside. The final, definitive blow came on Friday afternoon. Rocco had started his new job at TDOT on Wednesday. He'd spent Tuesday getting a Tennessee driver's license, opening a bank account, and signing a 6-month lease on a furnished one-bedroom apartment for $1,400 a month near the TDOT offices. He was, in the eyes of the law, a resident of Davidson County, Tennessee. At 4 p.m. on Friday, a man in a nondescript polo shirt rang the doorbell of the Montrose apartment. When Aveline answered, he asked, "Are you Aveline Vargas?" "Yes," she said, annoyed. "You've been served," he said, handing her a thick manila envelope and walking away. She closed the door, her hands trembling as she tore it open. The documents were cold and official. In the Circuit Court for Davidson County, Tennessee 4th Circuit Court. At the top, in bold letters, "Petition for Divorce." She sank onto the $9,000 sofa, the papers scattering around her. She read the words, but her brain couldn't process them. Petitioner, Rocco Vargas, a resident of Nashville, Tennessee. Respondent, Aveline Vargas, a resident of Houston, Texas. Irreconcilable differences. The petition laid out the separation of assets cleanly and brutally. Petitioner Rocco Vargas claims as his sole and separate premarital property the residence located at, followed by the address of the Heights bungalow. Petitioner Rocco Vargas claims as his sole and separate property his vested pension benefits accrued prior to the date of marriage. The marital assets to be divided were minimal. The furniture in the apartment, the shared bank account, which held less than $2,000. The marital debts, however, were listed clearly. The remaining 72-month lease on the apartment and the outstanding $61,000 loan on the 2019 Audi Q5. The petition proposed that since the respondent was in possession of these assets, she should assume the associated liabilities. It was a work of art, a legal masterpiece of quiet, devastating precision. Her plan for a friendly, no-drama divorce, where she controlled the narrative, had been preempted by a tactical nuclear strike from 3 states away. She was trapped. Trapped in the expensive apartment, trapped with the expensive car, trapped by the consequences of her own choices. She started to cry. Not quiet, dignified tears, but ugly, heaving sobs of pure, undiluted panic. She was alone in her glass box, surrounded by beautiful, expensive things that were suddenly worthless. The man she thought was a simple, predictable foundation had just revealed that he was, in fact, the architect of her ruin. And he had built it to last. 1 year later, the sunset over Radnor Lake was a masterpiece of orange and purple. Rocco stood on the wooden bridge breathing in the cool Tennessee air. The sounds were of birds, of the gentle lapping of water, of the quiet crunch of leaves under the feet of fellow hikers. There were no sirens, no traffic, just a profound and welcome peace. His new life was as solid and well-constructed as one of his bridges. He had excelled at his new job at TDOT. The $105,000 salary felt like a fortune in Nashville, where the cost of living was significantly less than in the trendy bubble of Montrose. He lived in the $1,400 a month apartment he had first rented, having found no reason to upgrade. It was simple, functional, and close to both work and the lake. It was perfect. His greatest joy at work came from his role as a mentor. He had been assigned to guide a new junior engineer, a bright young black woman named Kiara, fresh out of Vanderbilt. She was brilliant, eager, and full of questions. Rocco saw in her the same passion for the work that he had, the same love for making things that were strong and true. He would spend hours with her, going over schematics, teaching her the things they don't teach you in textbooks: how to talk to contractors, how to read the politics of a project, how to stand your ground when a bean counter wants to cut corners on safety. "You're a great teacher, Rocco," she'd told him last week over a cheap lunch of barbecue. "You make it make sense." The praise filled a space in him he didn't know was empty. He was no longer just functional, he was useful. He was building something again, not just with steel and concrete, but with people. The Houston Heights bungalow, the small house Aveline had despised, was now a key part of his financial independence. He had hired a property management company to handle it. It was rented to a young family for $3,000 a month. After the mortgage, taxes, and the management fee, it netted him a clean $1,500 a month, which went directly into an investment account. The house he had built with his own hands was now building his future. He rarely thought of Aveline. His lawyer, Mark Jeffries, had handled everything. She had made some noise, hired a Houston lawyer who had tried to challenge the Tennessee jurisdiction. But Mark had been right. It was a losing battle. The cost of fighting a long-distance legal war was more than she could bear. After a few threatening letters, she had capitulated. She'd signed the papers. He heard through the grapevine, a Christmas card from his old boss, Bill, what had become of her. She'd been forced to break the lease on the Montrose apartment, a $10,500 blow. She'd sold the Audi Q5 at a significant loss, the debt on it more than its resale value. She had moved into a small apartment with a roommate, a woman from the gallery. Her social circle, the one she had curated so carefully, had slowly dissipated, uncomfortable with the raw, messy reality of her financial and emotional collapse. The no-drama woman had become the very thing she professed to despise, a cautionary tale. Rocco felt no joy in her downfall. He felt no anger, no schadenfreude. He simply felt nothing. Her life was her own business now. His was here, on this bridge, with the setting sun on his face. He had forgiven her, not for her sake, but for his. He had forgiven her so he could set the weight of her memory down and walk away unburdened. Forgiveness, he realized, wasn't about condoning what someone did. It was about refusing to let their actions define your future. As twilight settled over the lake, he turned to walk back to his car. A thought crystallized in his mind, as clear and strong as the steel in one of his bridges. True wealth wasn't a $70,000 car or a $9,000 sofa. It wasn't a zip code or a brand name. True wealth was a quiet mind. It was purpose in your work. It was the freedom to walk in a beautiful place at the end of the day and feel at peace. It was the integrity of your own soul, a foundation that no one could see, but that held up everything. He hadn't run away from a marriage. He had run towards himself, and he had finally arrived. Sometimes the most powerful statement isn't a loud confrontation, but a quiet, decisive action. Rocco chose to build a new life instead of tearing down his old one. What do you think is the true measure of wealth in a person's life? Let us know in the comments below. We believe stories like Rocco's show that strength and dignity are the most valuable assets we can own. Thank you for being a part of our community at Love Beyond Pride.